Hi, this is Tim Gager. I'm sitting in my vehicle with Kim Addonizio. It's kind of like poets in crappy cars, drinking water. Kim is headed to MassPoetry, and I'd like to know how you found out about MassPoetry and what you're looking forward to do.
How I found out about it? Well, they found me.
They tend to do that.
Yeah. They just emailed me and asked me if I wanted to come, so here I am.
Do you know anything about the festival?
No, I don't, actually. I saw an article about it today on Twitter, so...
You're going to be on some great panels. Tell me a little bit about what people... well, at this point, they've already had heard the panel, but tell me a little bit about your panels.
Well, the one I know of is the state of poetry, and I'm not sure what I'm going to say about it. I guess I'm going to talk about the view from my window, because I think the state of poetry is kind of too big a subject for anybody to get their head around, so I think I'll just be kind of describing what it looks like from my vantage point.
Now, you're located in New York now. Formerly, you've lived in many places, including San Francisco. How does it differ as a writer to be in different locations?
You know, it's funny. I usually write about places after I leave them. So I'm just now writing about a trip I took to Lebanon 4 years ago. New York, although, you know, New York's kind of come into some of my writing. I think a lot of it is that when you're in someplace new, it kind of wakes you up because you get so habituated when you're living in the same place. And I was in the Bay Area for 30 years, and coming to New York, I just feel like I'm seeing everything in a way that I don't see my surroundings anymore in the Bay Area. And I think that just kind of keeps my senses alive, whether or not I'm writing about New York at the moment. And I'll probably write a lot more when I leave it.
Besides being a poet, you're also a fiction writer and a novelist. How does poetry find itself in your fiction and the other way around?
Well, you know, I don't know that it does. I feel like poetry really helped me to write fiction. I think I'm a much better writer because I started in poetry before I came to fiction, so it's done that. I don't know really if I would say that poetry enters my fiction as much as it's just another thing that has taught me to write, really. And although I do think the narrative is something that I didn't really... that I used to have in poetry that's now kind of migrated over to fiction and nonfiction. I'm a lot more interested now in telling stories in essays and short stories than I am in a poem.
When, are you influenced, and you're also a musician, does music influence your writing?
Am I still in frame? Okay.
Music influence your writing, and this way. This is ultimate multitasking. You can't text and drive, but I guess you can interview and drive.
This is my first car interview ever. It's pretty exciting.
It's very exciting for me. I'm very nervous I might hit something. Does music influence what you write, and do you write with music on?
Yeah, it influences my writing a lot, actually. I'm really deep into the blues, and I've written a number of blues poems. I've written poems about blues figures, poems in the blues form. So there's definitely some interplay and overlap, and I've also written stuff specifically... Whoa, wrong side of the road.
Yeah, well,
just thought I'd mention that.
I was very safe there. We could reverse the camera.
I forgot what I was saying.
Blues
and hard.
Influence.
It's hard even just to ride in a car and be interviewed, you know?
We're going to keep this interview really short because we can live through this.
Famous last words.
So anything else influence your writing, like a movie or plays or anything to that extent?
Yeah, everything. Everything that happens and that I think about in the course of a day, you know, is potential fuel. So I kind of gather it wherever I can. You know, I like looking at art a lot because I don't know a lot about art, and it's nonverbal, and it's actually a great relief to look at something I don't understand and that has no words, and it just works in some other part of my head that poetry doesn't, because for me it's so tied to not only language, but language is so tied to thinking. So poetry is very thinky, if that's a word.
Now,
Very thinky, very thoughtful, very, you know, and when I just look at a piece of art, it gives me some response, but I don't know how to articulate it, and I really like that.
describe in poetry what it's like for you to write in form versus no form.
I guess I think of form as sort of a continuum, because every poem has form of some kind. If you write a line and it's got an interesting rhythm, and you then repeat that rhythm, that's a kind of form. You know, you can repeat a word, and that can be a part of the formal quality of the poem. So, and I think that, you know, I think what it is that form is restraint in some way, and anything that has a limit ends up kind of pushing your imagination to overcome it or challenge it in some way. So the stricter the form, the stricter the limit, I think the greater the challenge. And the imagination really likes challenges, you know, likes to see something it can't figure out and try to figure out how to get through it.
Do you define yourself more of a confessional poet, an emotional poet, or purely like just straight nuts and bolts?
I just consider myself a poet. I don't.
We're in a tunnel now, huh?
Yeah, we are. Moved into the dark tunnel of semantics and definitions and little boxes to put poets in. Now we're emerging into the light.
There we are. Hello. How have you grown as a writer? I mean, think back about yourself as a young writer. What would you tell your young writer now?
I would tell her, well, I wouldn't have to tell her to keep going, because she always intended to keep going. That's probably what I would tell young writers now, besides myself, is to keep going. You kind of have to have a sort of burning obsession in order to do this thing. And if you don't have that, you know, you might be interested in something else as a vocation. But if you have that, I think the biggest thing is just not to stop doing it. I just read a great Zen quote today on Twitter, which was something like, rather than trying to get past the obstacles that are in your way, realize that the obstacle is a part of your way. I think that's a great thing to keep in mind.
Is there anything that you find is out of bounds now? Something that you wouldn't touch? Something that might affect yourself or others?
Well, I'm writing some personal essays now, so I do feel that I'm more aware of trying not to be mean to people. I can be kind of snarky, and my humor can be kind of snarky, and I'm really tempted sometimes to do that, and then I realize that it's probably better not to do that to certain people who might read it.
Has anyone ever gotten back to you when that was the case?
No, nobody ever has, but I'm just really aware of it, and aware of you know, needing to write, wanting to write my story, but not wanting to hurt anybody else in the process, I guess.
All right, when we get out of the tunnel and the light, we've got a final questions for you. Who was the first poet that blew you away and you thought, wow, this is really something?
Well, I want to say Sylvia Plath, because that's who I remember reading when I really had that sort of epiphany moment and that lightning bolt striking. But one of the first books I picked up when I was just starting to read poetry, as it happens, it was in Boston. I was in a bookshop in Boston in the days when there were bookshops, and I didn't know who to read. I just knew I wanted to read poems, and I picked up a cover with a sort of transparent woman in a forest, and it was Denise Levertov. And And so I discovered Levertov early, which was kind of great, entirely by accident.
Who was the last poet that you read that knocked your head off and blew you away?
Probably Dean Young. Yeah, I've been a big fan of Dean Young for a while. It's almost a stalkerish sort of obsession. Although I'm not stalking him. I've never actually spoken with him. But
now the secret's out.
Yeah, I seem to mention him a lot when I get asked that question because just somebody whose writing is surprising, and it resonates with me just on the level of its philosophy about life. And there are always, even in a poem that I don't think is fully Borgian, there are always moments of delight and surprise, and I'm really interested in surprise right now.
Well, I would really like to thank you for sitting in on this car interview and for being such a good sport.
Well, thank you, Tim.